President Donald Trump may be sending 4,000 extra US troops to war-torn Afghanistan. It's quite a U-turn. Before his election, he repeatedly called for America, whose UK embassy is here in central London, to scale back its involvement in conflicts abroad because they cost money and lives. He publicly rejected the idea of nation building and was highly critical of American intervention in the Middle East, claiming the estimated $6 trillion Washington spent there would be better used to fix America's crumbling infrastructure. Now it seems he may have changed his mind. In 2010, Washington officials estimated Afghanistan's mineral wealth at over $3 trillion. Reports suggest White House officials are looking at Afghanistan's deposits as a compelling reason to maintain a presence in the country. It could also help counter China's dominance of rare earth minerals. American Elements founder and CEO Michael Silver, who is heading the White House initiative, has claimed Beijing's plan to monopolize rare earth materials has put the US at a competitive disadvantage, and Afghanistan could help balance things up because it is rich in iron, copper, gold, cobalt and lithium. But the cost is high. The American public keeps calm and carries on, in dramatic contrast to Afghanistan, where the United Nations estimates the number of civilians killed across a 6-month period has just reached an 8-year record high, with the death toll across summer 2017 rising to hundreds. Americans watch the news as Afghan-based suicide bombers target funerals and banks, with a single blast in June killing at least 150 in the capital of Kabul. The Taliban is again making major gains, with the official government controlling less than 2/3 of the country. Why is Washington still so very interested in Afghanistan? And why is President Trump taking such an aggressive approach on the global stage? Simple questions with important answers. Before becoming president, Donald Trump urged America to pull its forces out of Afghanistan. Now he's talking about sending an extra 4,000 troops into that country. What's behind his U-turn? We asked the American people.
It has to be something to help the people that are there. For him to make a decision to send troops, which costs money, he had to be coached from somebody telling him what to do, because he's a new president. He has no clue of what's actually going on over there. So the best decision is from probably generals and other people in the military why they need more help there.
It's very hard to make out what his U-turn is about. It could be because of he's getting so much bad press and he's trying to divert attention away from himself. I can't see any other reason for sending troops over there.
Sending troops anywhere has ever resolved any conflict. So, I mean, we've seen in the past sending the troops in Afghanistan, Iraq, didn't bring more peace there. So, as a result, I'm not sure it's a good idea.
It is too many military men, too many generals in Trump's cabinet. Some people say, well, it is a way of keeping him under control, but I don't necessarily believe that. But certainly the flip side is these generals may end up dictating policies. But also, there is another reason. With the resignation of Bannon, with the resignation of also Sebastian Gorka, Trump has lost his major strategist. And that is the reason, the major reason why he has gone in for this senseless and meaningless U-turn.
Well, I think Donald Trump is a president who has been known for his U-turn since the campaign. This is somebody who has changed his opinions on a number of issues countless times. So I don't think it's anything particularly unusual. I think with Trump and Afghanistan, one thing you have to realize about his administration is that he's surrounded by generals. In fact, we haven't really had this kind of situation in the history of the US before, or at least not for many decades, where there's been such a militarized administration. So ironically, actually, the person who is most opposed to an increase of US forces in Afghanistan was his chief strategist, Stephen Bannon, who also happened to be the most racist and xenophobic person around, but he actually wanted a full withdrawal from Afghanistan. But with Stephen Bannon having been sacked from the administration, then I think it gave the generals the green light to go ahead with this surge in troops. Now, Trump himself, when he gave his speech on the increase of US presence, he was very ambiguous about the numbers. He didn't actually say, we're going to commit 4,000 further troops. I think a part of him has to also feel embarrassed that he's made this big U-turn, because he did spend the whole of the Obama administration critiquing Obama for his for his presence in Afghanistan and for not actually ending the war, even though officially the US has suspended its combat operations.
Over 1,600 American soldiers have died in Afghanistan, and many believe the country is more dangerous now than before 2001. Why, in the American public's view, does Washington insist on sending troops there when the results to date have been so negative?
I think the reason that it's become more dangerous is because it's escalated the amount of violence going on there, because the Taliban or whatever militant group is present there, they have to ramp up because now they're dealing with the US, so it becomes less safe, more violent. And the reason that we're continuing to send in troops is because we want to prove that what we do is working. Even if it isn't working and we need to just supply more, that's probably why we're just upping it.
Again, it appears to be a very strange motive and move to do that if that many soldiers have been killed unnecessarily, and at the same time there have been somewhere in the region of about 12,000 civilians have been killed almost on an annual basis, which is, in my opinion, 1,000 times worse. But again, it's very hard to comprehend what the decision making is these days.
I'm not sure sending troops is gonna make the people there very, very happy.
Like I said before, there's a need. Whether it's a successful endeavor to be over there, that's the question. So this war has been raging for many years now. Not much progress. I think that perhaps it's time for us to responsibly limit our involvement.
Quite clearly, the war having no obvious result. Why is it going on? The ancient Greeks had this wisdom. Those whom the gods wish to destroy, they first drive mad. So in a way, you could argue this is a kind of madness. But it's a bit more than that. If we go back to Iraq, the invasion of Iraq done under George W. Bush was under the pretext that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. Iraq was invaded and destroyed. No weapons of mass destruction were found. And nobody wanted to say it plainly that was the case. So they tried to patch it up by saying regime change, we got to overthrow a dictator, even if regime change is actually illegal under international law. But basically, there was a reluctance, an unwillingness to confess that it was a mistake. And I see a similarity with Afghanistan. There is also an unwillingness, a reluctance to acknowledge that this is a mistake. They made a mistake. Now, how do you get out of a mistake? You know, there is a famous expression, when you are in a hole, don't keep digging, because you get deeper and deeper into the hole. Stop digging. But what seems to me the Americans are doing, they stop digging. They keep digging. They keep digging deeper and deeper. And quite clearly, this is a recipe for destruction.
Well, it's an interesting question, because actually the Taliban presence in Afghanistan is much stronger than it was in 2001, before the U.S. occupation of the country. So you would look at that and say, perhaps the last 16 years of war and these U.S. fatalities, and of course the thousands of Afghan civilians who have died, Afghan security personnel, this simply isn't worth it. But I think that the United States is fixated on wanting to ensure that they don't lose having that control over Afghanistan, and it's a very resource-rich region. It's also a very strategically important part of the world. But also there's not an appetite for war in the United States after what happened in Iraq. Of course, George Bush was very popular when he launched the war of Iraq, and then within a few years was extremely unpopular. There's not an appetite in the US for war, for sons, daughters, fathers dying in combat. So they're very careful to also not say that these are combat forces. In other words, combat operations have been suspended. These are going to be troops who are so-called advising the Afghan army, even though there is, of course, the possibility that they will be dying on the battlefield. So it comes down to also how do you assess what boots on the ground means? Are these combat troops, or are these troops that are going to be playing a different role, at least officially?
Many in America and internationally expressed disgust at Donald Trump's handling of the racially motivated Charlottesville unrest. Could sending 4,000 troops into Afghanistan be a tactic to divert attention away from the Charlottesville incident and Trump's response to it? Here's the public's view.
I mean, it might be. It might also just be a really bad decision. But he didn't handle Charlottesville very well. But this is potentially, I mean, I can't say for certain. Who knows what he's thinking at this point?
I think that the Charlottesville response has quietened down to a certain degree. What he could be doing, or what the government here could be doing, is actually taking attention away from the fact that other far more monuments are coming under scrutiny, and things seem to be happening with other monuments from what I read in the media.
I think we have never seen in this country a presidency and administration the way we see it today. So this is new territory for us as a nation. Whether it's a diversion, I mean, if it is one of many, because it's so chaotic. From day to day, there's something different to discuss. So is it a diversion? Perhaps. But I do know it's a real issue. Hopefully the president has listened to his advisors and to make the best decision for the country.
That could be a reason, but I have to say quite plainly that I agree with Trump initially. I don't give a damn. Some people find it a shocking response. It is quite clear that hating people were on both sides. Haters belong to all sorts of parties. And racism, white supremacy is abominable. Neo-Nazism is completely disgusting. But the media, by focusing on a handful of nutcases and fanatics, these yobs, big guys with tattooed swastikas, and the people with the Ku Klux Klan hoods. You know, the Ku Klux Klan had 4 million followers time back. Today, we've got only a few thousand. It's large and irrelevant, a little group, but the liberal media like to focus on these hate groups, the Ku Klux Klan, the neo-Nazis, and blow it up out of proportion, and then trying to pitch it as if this was a confrontation between good and evil.
Actually, I don't think Donald Trump cares whatsoever what people think about him, which is something that has to be frustrating also for the people around him in his administration. I mean, when Donald Trump gave his press conference at Trump Tower, in which he basically came to the defense of neo-Nazis and Ku Klux Klan supporters, you could look around and you could see that there were people in his team who looked very uneasy, looked very disgusted. So I don't think Trump himself really cares about distancing himself from his Charlottesville response or from wanting to use Afghanistan as a distraction, but perhaps for some of the forces who are next to him, it would be better for public relations to divert the attention away from Charlottesville. But I don't think that this announcement was really enough to do that. This is not, for example, Trump declaring war on North Korea or engaging the United States in a new war somewhere abroad. I think Trump he's always been somebody who's basically shot from the hip. He doesn't really care what people, think about him. And this is actually one of the reasons, unfortunately, why he was so successful in winning the election last year, because he positioned himself to be against the establishment. He positioned himself to not be your typical politician who talked in very politically correct language. But I think that the U.S. political establishment is worried about, and especially people in his administration and his own party, in the way that he talks and in some of the things that he says, which are outside the bounds of what's acceptable.
The statistics tell a remarkable story. 3 presidents have approved operations across 16 years. President Obama promised to reduce troop numbers to 5,500. Instead, he increased them to 8,400. Now Trump is committing to considering increasing the overall number to 12,400. So far, American fatalities total 1,695 and rising. By contrast, total direct Afghan deaths are estimated to exceed 91,000. Trump told the world he'd move away from aggressive US foreign policy and focus on making America great again. Yet, as president, he has attacked Syria, bombed Afghanistan, threatened North Korea, and sought to intervene in Venezuela and Iran. Why has he been so aggressive in his foreign policy? We asked the American public.
Honestly, he might have just not really held those sentiments during the campaign. He might have just wanted those so that people would vote for him, and as soon as he was elected into office, he'd just go back to what he was actually thinking. Also, it might have cheap oil. That's a potential option, because that would make America great again because of cheap oil prices or something along those lines. But yeah, he might have just never held those sentiments to begin with.
Again, it could be a lot to do with the negative press that's coming out. So these actions would take away from that to a degree. On the other hand, I am under the impression that there's a lot of natural resources there which are worth hanging out for or attempting to keep control of. So that could be another reason.
Because when he wanted to become a president, his slogan was "Make America Great Again." So I just want to, I believe he wants to show that America is still there on the exterior politics and has a big military threat. So it's just to show that America is here, and yeah.
Yes, I mean, it has to be admitted he did a U-turn on the question of foreign policy. He campaigned on getting out of these morasses and letting people choose their own system, political system. And then he said, well, we are going to stand as an example, as a beacon on a hill. So if people want to follow our model, well, fine. If people want to have their own system of government, it's their own problem. So we are not going to do a regime change of a policy of George W. Bush, which was the policy of neoconservatives, neocons. Quite clearly, this aggressive policy indicates that he's lost his rudder. He's lost his ideological point of reference, which again was Bannon. He was the strategist, he was the ideologue. Bannon is a guy with real brains. Bannon knew what was in the interest of the United States. These mildly aggressive, demonstrative actions are completely meaningless and are no good. On the question of Afghanistan, there was a paper the other day, there was a photograph showing some Afghani women back in the 60s wearing Western clothes and saying the photograph persuaded Trump to intervene again and send the troops to Afghanistan because he wants to send the girl to school. Come on, but again, this is neocons, this is regime change, this is interfering, telling societies of a different kind what to do, taking American feminism as a model. Not all countries, not all societies want to take American culture, American values as a benchmark. President Kagame of Rwanda just said, don't judge us by the yardstick of the West. We have our own yardstick, and Trump should take a leaf out of that book.
Well, Trump actually never positioned himself as a non-interventionist. It was always a confusing mix of, on the one hand, saying he wanted better relations with Russia, for example, but then on the other hand, saying things like, well, we should be able to kill the families of so-called terrorists, or, I don't necessarily have a problem with using the nuclear bomb. So it was always quite confusing, and I think this is again one of the reasons why the political establishment was a little bit terrified of Trump, because he's so erratic. You don't know which way that he's going. But I think that part of Make America Great Again, sure, it's based on economic protectionism, but it also has to be based on asserting U.S. military strength and domination. So I think that with Trump, for example, attacking Syria, when he did that, it actually made him more acceptable in the eyes of both the Republican and Democratic Party elites in Congress. Until that point, he wasn't really viewed as being presidential. But every time that Trump makes a decision which is more in line with the mainstream Republican and Democratic parties, who have this joint position on U.S. Imperialism or foreign policy, then he appears to be more presidential and he's more acceptable. But at the same time, I think some people are a little bit concerned in the U.S. political establishment about some of his comments towards North Korea. Perhaps they consider it a little bit too reckless, too dangerous. But Trump was never a non-interventionist. Trump is in many ways proving that he is a war hawk.
America has been in Afghanistan for 16 years, Washington's longest ever war, with 3 presidents approving operations. Why is the US so determined to maintain a presence there? Could it be for Afghanistan's mineral wealth, estimated at $3 trillion? The American public said this.
Exactly right. Remember, this world runs on money.
It's a mix of paranoia and resources, because it's not really the war on terror, it's more of the war on give us your oil. That's pretty much what it's become.
Well, I think that could be the case, which is really what I've just said. The natural resources in that part of the world would be of extreme use to the US of A.
And we know that that country, the natives there do not own their wealth. It's owned by people who have come in and invaded. I mean, so historically it could be a valid point, but I really can't say why. We feel the need to be there.
It's the logic of invasion. It's the logic of going into a country which doesn't want you. Afghanistan is a mountainous country. And it's always when a power ventures to stifle a rebellion into a mountainous country, usually it's actually quite difficult to do so. Mountaineers are very difficult to tame, very difficult to subjugate. Now, and Afghanistan is that kind of country. No power has been able to pacify Afghanistan. Alexander the Great, 2,300 years ago, did it temporarily. If I was a president, if I was an advisor to President Trump, which actually I offer myself to do, I would say, Mr. President, just listen to the voice of wisdom and get out of a bloody place.
Well, of course, the United States is going to be concerned about mineral wealth anywhere it exists, anywhere that there's the potential for resource extraction or for resources to come into the pockets of U.S. corporations. Of course, there'll be all for wars in those areas. I mean, we saw that with the intervention in Libya in 2011. Before that, some State Department cables had talked about the resources that existed there, namely oil, and how resource nationalism, as they called it, was a big problem to be overcome, and how corporations, U.S. corporations in particular, wanted stronger and greater access to those markets. But I think with Afghanistan, more so than the resources themselves, it's the strategic position of the country, especially being in Central Asia and also right next to Iran. If we look at Trump's foreign policy, the main aspect of it is an anti-Iran orientation as well as an anti-China orientation. Of course, China also geographically is very close. Russia is also very close. So I think Afghanistan is a key area in the world for U.S. geostrategic interests, and it will be regardless of it's Trump in office or Obama in office or Bush in office or whoever the next U.S. president also is. the United States will continue its presence. It seems like an endless war, a never-ending war, and it seems as if the U.S. may, at this point, have no plans whatsoever to ever leave the country.
Mr. Trump has told reporters, "I took over a mess and we're going to make it a lot less messy." But in agreeing to boost troop levels in Afghanistan, Mr. Trump has cemented America's continuing involvement in a conflict that has now stretched across 3 presidential administrations and nearly 2 decades. Trump has said the turbulent situation in Afghanistan requires a response. Yet Defense Secretary Jim Mattis told Congress, "We are not winning in Afghanistan," echoing the concerns of military officials who have told lawmakers they need more troops. The Soviet Union eventually retreated from that country, defeated and humiliated. It's a strong clue that the United States may never conquer that country either. But $3 trillion worth of minerals buried beneath the surface of that war-torn country may make them economically and politically obsessed with trying.